a very warm welcome to our amazing panelists and our global audience on Zoom and Facebook Live to Green Hope Foundation's dialogue at the United Nations Food Systems Summit. I am Kehkasha. I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I am delighted to be your moderator for this webinar. Today, we have with us an intergenerational panel of experts and grassroots activists who will share their insights and experiences on the theme, Rebuilding Forest-Dependent Communities Through Circular Bioeconomy. Before we begin, I would like to inform our audience that you can post your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comment section on our Facebook Live. Now, we have taken our forests for granted, especially in the last century, and we have been decimating them with impunity as if they stood in the path of progress. And now with the ominous manifestations of climate change, of rapidly escalating land degradation, with receding sources of potable water and an increasing human population that will soon cross 8 billion, we are fast reaching a point of no return. Because not only are forests crucial because of their capacity to slow climate change by acting as carbon dioxide sinks, conversely, deforestation, forest degradation, and land use change contribute to about 12% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And while the Western media mostly focuses on the Amazon, there are larger fires and logging that are depleting forests in multiple parts of the world. And not only are we losing a vital part of our biodiversity, this process has pushed hundreds of millions of people who have traditionally depended on forests for their livelihoods into poverty, adding pre-existing inequalities that natural disasters and pandemics like COVID-19 thrive upon. So as we recover from the greatest crisis in our lifetimes, one that began as a health crisis and soon metamorphosized into a gargantuan economic, social, and human crisis, we need to take stock on how we can rebuild better and build forward better. How can we stop this linear process of consumption and wastage? How can we consume with care? How do we move towards circular bioeconomies and regenerate our forests, amplifying the traditional knowledge of these communities that have nourished them for generations? And how can we move to people-centric policies of securing our present without jeopardizing our future? So before we start our panel discussion, we would like to show 3 short clips of our conversations with farmers who work within the forest-dependent communities of 3 different countries: Bangladesh, Liberia, and India.
আমি মোহাম্মদ সত্তার বলছি বাংলাদেশ থেকে।
আচ্ছা, আপনি কি ধরনের শস্য ক্ষেতে উৎপাদন করেন?
আমি এই যেমন লাল শাক, পালং শাক, পাতাকপি, শালগম এগুলো করি।
তারপর ধান, এগুলো
ধান, যেমন কলাই মসুরিও করি। তা বর্ষায় ক্ষতি হয় এবং কি রোদে তেমন ক্ষতি হয় না, যখন বর্ষায় ক্ষতি হয় বেশি।
আচ্ছা, এই করোনা মহামারীতে আপনার কি সমস্যা হয়েছে? ধরেন আমাদের
সমস্যা বলতে যাই করি, শাকসবজি যাই করি, এগুলা তো বিক্রি করতে পারতেছি না। বাজারে গেলে দোকানপাট খোলা থাকে না, লোকজন আসে না, যেই মূল্য পাওয়ার সেই মূল্য পাইতেছি না। আর 10 টাকা দাম আছে, আমরা 5 টাকা, 4 টাকা, 5 টাকা এরকম পাই। খাওয়া হয় বেকার দিয়ে আছি, মানে যা ফলাই তাতে আমার যা মানে খরচ হয় তাতে আমার আসে না।
মানে খাবারের কষ্ট,
খাবার দাবারের খুবই কষ্ট চলছে না।
আচ্ছা, এছাড়া ধরেন আপনার এই যে বৃষ্টি হয় অনেক, তারপর হচ্ছে অনেক সময় অনেক খরা থাকে, এইসব সমস্যায় আপনাদের কি সমস্যা?
মানে বর্ষার সময় যেমন বীজ বুনলাম, বর্ষা হইলো কিন্তু আমাদের বীজগুলো চলে যায়। তখন যদি আমরা মানে আর্থিক থাকে তাহলে তো আমরা মনে করেন যে
ড্রেনেজ সিস্টেম যেটা
একটা ছাপার সিস্টেম করতে পারছি, তেরপল দিয়ে করলে আমরা 2-4 টাকা পাই।
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা,
সেটা তো করতে পারতেছি না।
আর একদম প্রচুর খরাতে আপনাদের কি সমস্যা হয়?
খরাতে সমস্যা হয়, যেমন দেখা গেছে অনেক সময় রোগ জমে পুড়ে যায়, এই হয়তো এটা সময় মতো ওষুধ দিতে পারতেছি না। কিন্তু এই লকডাউনে আমাদের সমস্যাটা বেশি, কিন্তু এর আগে তেমনটা সমস্যা ছিল না।
আচ্ছা,
কারণ যখন তখন আমরা দোকানপাটে খোলা পাইছি, একটা রোগ বাজছে, ধানের রোগ বাজছে, তখন আইনা ট্রিটমেন্ট চালাতে পারছি। কিন্তু এখন তো দোকানপাট ঠিক মতো খোলা পাই না।
আচ্ছা ভাই, ধন্যবাদ। আমরা আমাদের জায়গা থেকে সর্বোচ্চ চেষ্টা করবো আপনাকে সহযোগিতার জন্য, আমাদের সাথে থাকবেন। ধন্যবাদ।
ধন্যবাদ।
আসসালামু
সালাম।
First of all, I'm Umar Pusa, citizen of Latvia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we are here on your farm. As I can see cassava and other things. What do you grow here?
As for me, I grow both cassava and rice.
Okay, he grows both cassava and rice. So, folks, if you can see, this is a rice farm. This is less than acres of land or rice. And if you can see this way, this is a cassava that he grows as well. So, in terms of what are some of those problems that you face through doing your farm?
Like those days, our parents used to start brushing the November.
Okay.
But this day, rain can be falling until December.
Okay.
So we can start from January.
Oh, okay.
This time.
So definitely there's a lot of changes within our climatic system. First, people usually start with their brushing from November, as he regularly said. So he is experienced in this because he been doing this for the last 10 to 15 years, and he have vast experience on every other climatic changes that are happening over the years. So what are some of those one thing that you think that is really affecting your rice or your cassava from growing?
I said earlier.
Yeah.
For we used to plant in for cassava. We
Yeah.
used to plant in from May,
Okay.
but now we come up to April.
Okay.
Yeah, due to the rain.
Okay. So now, due to climate change, there's a shift in the planting season of the cassava, and the same with rice. So due to that, there will be limited yielding of those products. And if you can see, this rice farm, and the amount of rice that probably there is not very sufficient due to some of those problems that they face. So currently, we are in one of the tough time of the world. We are faced with coronavirus. How have COVID affected your farming or your family or your activities?
Like those days are from 2015.
Yeah.
We used to do the work in cool.
Okay.
That means we come together like 25 person.
Okay.
But this day we call it down due to COVID-19.
Okay. So the workforce.
So either 10 or 9.
So the workforce have drastically reduced, and that has also lead to a limited farming land for them. So these are problems that farmers around the world, most especially Latvia and other part of Liberia, are faced with. So in terms of recommendation, what is your recommendation to international world? What do you suggest to them?
Well, as for me, it's many because through cassava we support our children to go to school. But now the cassava can't grow as those days it used to. And also the rest. This is my 5th year in doing this farm, the rest one. I encourage many people, but this year we only two. We do the work. The Mamusu, Musu Tika, and me. But last year we were 16. We do the farm.
ಉದರ್ ದಾದ ಪನ್ ಕುಡರ ಪನ್ ಶಂಭು ಶಂಭು ಒಲ್ಪ ಪುನು ಏತ್ ಸಮ ಹಿಡ್ದಿಂಚು ಫಾರ್ಮಿಂಗ್ ಮಂತೊಂದಿಲ್ಲ ಪನ ಒಂದು 40 ವರ್ಷ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಅವಂದ ಮತ್ತೆ ತೋಟದ ಪುರ ಕೆಲಸ
ಬಲ್ತೋದಿಲ್ಲ
42 ವರ್ಷ ಅದಗಡ್ದು ಇತ್ತೆ ಮಸ್ತ್ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಉಂಡು ಮತ್ತೆ ಬರ್ಸಪುರ ಬತ್ತನ ಇಂಚಿನ ಬರ್ಸಪುರ ಬತ್ತನ ಎಡ್ಡೆನ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆವೊಂದುಂಡ ದುಂಬುಡ್ದು ಕಡಿಮೆನ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಐತೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಕಡಿಮೆ ನಮಕ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ಬುಳ್ಳೆಕ್ ಪುರ ಹಾಳಾಪುನ ಬಸ್ಸ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಅಂಡ
ವರ್ಷ ಕಮ್ಮಿಲ್ಲ ಕಂಡು ನೀರು ಕಟ್ಟ ಉಂಟದೆ ಒಕ್ಕ ಬರದೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿದ್ದೆ ಕಂಡು ಗೊತ್ತ ಪೋಲಿಕ್ಲಪ್ಪ
ನಿಕ್ಲಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಪೂರ ಫಲ ಪೂರ ದುಂಬು ಬರುವಂತ ಅಂಚನೆ ಬರ್ಪುಂಡ ತಿತ್ತೆ
ಓಲ್ ಬರ್ತದೆ
ಅವು ಈ ಎಂಚಿನ ಏನು ನೊಂದಿಟ್ಟು ನಮ್ಮ ಪೂರ ಮರ ಪೂರ ಕಟ್ತದೆ ಬಡ್ಸ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಯ್ನೇಟ್ ಅಂಚ
ಕೆಲವು ಅಂಚ ಬರ್ತದೆ ಅಪ್ಪಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಈ ಮೋಡ ಇದೆ ಮರ ಬಟ್ಟಿತ್ತಂತ ಮೋಡ ಉಂಟಾ ಉಂಟು ಅಂಚೆ ಬಸ್ ಆಗ್ತದೆ ನಕ್ಕಲ್ಲಿ ಬಸ್ ಹೋಗಿದ್ವಿ ಗಾಲಿಗೆ ಬಲ್ತು
ಬರ್ಪುಂಡು ನಿಕ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ಖುಷಿ ಒಂದು ತೊಟ್ಟಾರ ಕೆಲಸ ಅನ್ಪುಣ
ಯಾರು ನೆಟ್ಟೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ
These videos showed us that climate change, biodiversity loss, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic have wreaked havoc on the lives of these farmers. And it's 3 different countries, but at the root of it, the stories are the same. And that is why today's discussion on rebuilding forest-dependent communities through circular bioeconomy is so important. So on that note, I shall now invite our panelists to take the floor. Our first speaker is Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa, former president of the United Nations General Assembly, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and of Defense, Ecuador. Ms. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kikashan. As always, it is a privilege to be with you with such an incredible layout of amazing speakers today. And I have to say that I'm pretty touched to see and witness how important communities are to building sustainable and peaceful societies to counter the dramatic effects of climate change. And we gather here a few weeks from the UN Food System Summit. And I think that the messages we heard, what we learned just now with these short videos is incredible. I think that you have mentioned in your introduction that the climate crisis is one of the greatest challenges that we are facing. And I think that we have all read and looked at the latest report from the IPCC, and what we are witnessing is that there are signs that we are approaching a point of no return in climate change. And as you said, Kikashan, we are moving towards an ecological and civilizational catastrophe, which is crystal clear, the scientific evidence that anthropogenic greenhouse gases are provoking irreparable damage was so clear in the 9th of August report of the IPCC. And what we saw is that the arithmetics of the climate crisis are getting worse and worse. And one of the signs was among so many numbers and data, the report asserts that the global temperature in the first 2 decades of our century, the 21st century, was almost 1 degree Celsius higher than in the 1850s, 1900 period. And this is unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. So we are not doing things right. This is evident in terms of the leadership, in terms of the decision-making, in terms of closing the implementation gap. We have this very powerful umbrella, which is the Paris Agreement. We have financial commitments that we have not met, especially with countries of the global south. We have mitigation targets that we have not met. We have adaptation and resilience building challenges that we have not acted upon. And the paradox is that we see that at the community and local level, there is a lot of movement, a lot of innovation, a lot of ideas of local knowledge that is put to the service of climate efforts worldwide. And so we see the importance of nature-based solutions, not only to climate change, but to face a connected crisis, which is the extinction crisis. I have the privilege to serve in the strategic committee of the science panel for the Amazon. And what we see, this international initiative that brings together scientists, more than 200 scientists from North and South working in the Amazon. Basically, what we saw in the late report of the panel is that the Amazon is nearing a tipping point due to the devastating trends of climate change and human activity that is threatening the survival of both the forest and aquatic ecosystems, which, of course, in the case of the tropical rainforest, especially the Amazonian rainforest, it's really putting in danger not only the ecosystems, but also the people living in these ecosystems, especially indigenous peoples and local communities. And we have to remember that while the protection of the Amazon forest is crucial for mitigating climate change worldwide, it is at the same time being destroyed by the systematic expansion of very inefficient cattle ranching, low productivity agriculture, widespread use of toxic chemicals, including mercury pollution, hydroelectric dams, and illegal logging, mining, and oil exploitation. So I'm bringing the example of the Amazon because basically we are here to discuss about bioeconomy and circular economy, and that could be the answer for the Amazon forest. And basically a bioeconomy approach, as we all know, aims at harnessing the potential of forest in transforming its regeneration into an engine of economic growth, combining scientific knowledge with traditional knowledge of indigenous and local communities, and transforming the production and trade of commodities in a way that, of course, strengthens forest environments and adds technological value to sustainable production chains. So I think that this approach is essential for an economic recovery, not only for the Amazon, but I would say worldwide. Everybody speaks about building forward better, a greener and more inclusive model, creating green jobs, driving investment in scaling up, recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, sustainable low carbon green infrastructure, health, education, and broadband access. We cannot have half of the world's population disconnected, et cetera, et cetera. So basically what the lesson perhaps that I have learned, especially with these very inspiring videos, is that the integrity of ecosystems, sustainable livelihoods for local communities, nature-based solutions for climate stabilization are central to ensuring well-functioning food systems and food security. And here we see that there is an inextricable relationship between climate stabilization and food security, between healthy ecosystems and food production. In perhaps just to close, Kekash, and one of the greatest paradoxes of our times is the staggering increase of hunger. 811 million people still go hungry every day. And after steadily declining for a decade, world hunger is on the rise, and it's affecting almost 10% of people globally. And yet, you know, one third of the food produced in the world for human consumption every year, approximately 1.3 billion tons, gets lost or wasted. So we are living a world of paradoxes. And why? And just to end, I would say We have the technology, we have the knowledge, including traditional and indigenous knowledge. We have the resources to build forward a greener and fairer world. And I think that the COVID-19 economic recovery plans offer a great opportunity to move in the right direction. So we have the chance, the golden opportunity to build forward better by making informed and responsible policy and political choices. So we continue to provide the world with global environmental services while protecting and improving the well-being, the rights and dignity of local and indigenous communities. Thank you, Kikashan, and back to you. Eager to hear the panelists today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marianne. You're right. We are in a world where there is a paradox where on one hand, as you said, 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted every year, yet millions of people go hungry, and that is increased during the pandemic. Farmers are so severely affected, including those in forest-dependent communities. So it is really sad that we still live in this world of paradoxes, but at the same time, by ensuring that we rebuild better and not just build back to normal, because normal brought us here, but build forward better into a new normal, then we can ensure that, you know, we move to build resilience amongst forest-dependent communities, and of course, using a circular bioeconomy that takes into account profit, people, and the planet. So thank you once again, Ms. Maria. I would now like to invite our next panelist, Mr. Satya Travati, Secretary General of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet. You have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Kekasha, and thank you, Maria, for outlining eloquently how not only that we have a great challenge, but we have an equally momentous opportunity to make a difference. The IPCC report, of course, brought out a little more starkly than before. I don't think the science was ever missing. It has always been there. What is missing is a level of awareness on the part of the human of the species to understand what's at stake. And actually what's at stake is not the planet. What's at stake is, of course, the life of many other species that will go extinct thanks to our mindless behavior and the way we have conducted ourselves in the last 100 years. We're at 1.1 degrees of global warming already, and we are at the current trajectory, we are warming about 0.2 degrees every decade, which basically means the 1.5 degree future will not be in 2100, it will be in 2040. And that's a guarantee unless we act. And actually, if we don't act, it is also possible that the dominoes will accelerate, as we are seeing now with the Greenland ice sheets melting. There are new projections from NASA that is telling us that currently we are headed to a minimum of 2 feet of sea level rise by the end of this century. That's a minimum. It can only get worse. And as IPCC discovers more science, more proof points, more evidence, it becomes more and more clear that the dominoes are falling and the positive feedback loops are accelerating. We're seeing that in Siberia, we're seeing that in the Arctic, we're seeing that with devastating force in the United States itself. Last year, the United States lost 5 million acres of forests to forest fires. This year, the summer is not yet over, and they've lost already 3.5 million acres. And then, of course, one could go around the world and find equally devastating examples of forests being lost at an alarming pace. Now, when the COVID pandemic came through, we saw some very encouraging signs of animals on the streets, you know, and people were like, wow, we see the animals roaming freely and all, which was kind of counterintuitive because animals don't like to roam on the streets. Animals like to stay in the forests. That the fact that they were roaming on the streets was actually indicative of the fact that we've taken away their habitat. And because we were missing from our own habitat for the pandemic, so they thought that this might be a good time to venture out and see what is on the outer edges of the forest. But the fact is that in 2020, the world lost tree cover for an area larger than the United Kingdom, and including 4.2 million hectares of primary tropical forests, and the rate of increase, especially in the loss of primary tropical forests, is devastating, especially as Maria pointed out so well, in the Amazon, which is kind of the rain factory of the Americas, and as well as the one that creates all the oxygen that everybody else uses without even acknowledging a debt of gratitude to the people of that region that protect and keep the forests. So that's what the reality is. Now, is there hope? Of course there is hope. We can always turn back, and we can do better. I was quite impressed to see the farmers in Liberia. Now, Liberia presents a tremendous paradox. 20 years ago, I used to be the head of planning for what was then the largest peacekeeping mission in the world, UNMIL. And what struck me when I started working there after the Accra Peace Accords was that it is a country with 84% arable land. And of course, now the population has gone beyond 4 million, but at that time it was little over 3 million. So just for 3 million people, a rather big country, 84% arable land, rainfall surplus, and governments had fallen there multiple times for rice riots because you can't get the rice grown in the country. So sometimes it's not the lack of resources, but the lack of knowledgeable and wise leaders, and that's what brings me to the challenge of leadership, which is what is the biggest challenge. Actually, the challenge is not of resources, the challenge is not of willingness on the part of people to change behavior, or for that matter, the corporations. The challenge is with our leaders, and we all have a blame to share because we put these leaders in place. And unless that changes, we will continue to see what we are seeing. And we just have roughly about 9 years, because we will not achieve the SDGs, will not achieve the climate goals or the Hyogo framework for action for disaster risk reduction. None of this will happen if we do not wake up our leaders and demand that they act in the interest of people and planet. Now, before I close, I just wanted to highlight the fact that we did some research in Indonesia. It was about 10 years ago. It was led by Pawan Sukhdev, who's quite well known as the father of the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity study. Also won the Tyler Prize last year, which is also known as the Environmental Nobel. So he was the study leader, and I was then head of UN ORCID, the UN's Red Plus office that was set up by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And we did this study of forest dwelling communities that were living along the rivers in a forest, or lived deep within the forest, or lived along a roadhead where they had access to economic goods and services. And what we found, which we later coined the term GDP of the poor, is not even calculated or captured in the national economic metrics. We found that on an average, a person dwelling in the forest actually made $250 a month in real price, not purchasing power parity. In real price, $250 a month from the services they got from the forest. And that was not even factored into the national GDP of Indonesia. So that's, and when that is missing, that consciousness is missing, it is very easy for us to cut down the forest and to claim that by cutting down, we actually have advanced development and advanced growth. And then that's why the challenge is even more stark, that we have been chasing false economics and false profits of growth by cutting down our forests and thereby extinguishing any possibility of a circular bioeconomy. People often talk about the requirement of agrochemicals to do agriculture, and I point them to the the forests in the Amazon or the rainforests in Asia, that nobody has ever put a pinch of fertilizer in these most vibrant of living, breathing forests. And that is because nature takes care of itself. Nature is harmonic, nature is circular. So if we just learned from nature and worked around it rather instead of it, then we will actually have the solutions we are desperately looking for. And I want to echo what Maria already mentioned, that the solution, yes, we can do a bit of avoided emissions by having better energy transition, more efficient vehicles and electric mobility and all, but the true solution lies in going back to nature. The soil has the capacity to hold 3 times as much carbon as is in the atmosphere. And we have a real possibility. This will bring about prosperity at the grassroots for the people that live at the bottom of the pyramid. And then we will not only have a transition, but we'll also have a just transition. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Travati. And yes, the just transition is so important. And, thank you for bringing up the whole concept of the false economics and the false growth. That's one of the biggest problems that even we see as grassroots actors, is that so much of the data that is published is from the top down and actually ignores the needs and wants of the communities who actually live within these forest environments. And, because of that top-down approach, it just and disconnected approach, their needs and wants are not displayed in data, and it justifies the cutting down of their forests and destroying their livelihoods. And of course, we do need knowledgeable leaders and, who actually know and care about their people and the planet. So yes, that is something that I think we as civil society can definitely drive it, because as you said, at the end of the day, we elect our leaders. So thank you once again. And I shall now invite our next panelist, Ms. Nadaya Belchika, Lead Technical Specialist, Gender and Social Inclusion of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD. Nadaya, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kekashan. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm very honored to be sharing the floor with such esteemed panelists. And it is a very tall order, actually, to follow the opening statement by Maria, and also to follow what Satya just said, because yes, we have challenges and opportunity. And of course, there is no turning back. The loss of biodiversity has posed a very strong and a very important challenge for the humanity as a whole. So we are here today to discuss the resilience of forest-dependent community in the context of circular bioeconomy. And so perhaps before we get started, I would like just to, in one sentence, just introduce IFAD. And then I would introduce and discuss what IFAD is doing in that context and how IFAD is contributing to addressing to that challenge. So IFAD is a dual institution. So it's a UN institution as well as a financial institution that provides financing to government to develop projects that are aligned with their own priorities. So IFAD has a long-standing commitment to forest-dependent communities, and in particular with climate adaptation activities, resource management, including sustainability of biodiversity. So between 2010 and 2015, for instance, IFAD dedicated just over 11% of its investment on environment and natural resources management, including biodiversity specifically. And nowadays, all IFAD investments include climate vulnerability assessments to determine how IFAD's investment can mitigate against climate change. Equally important, most recently, IFAD has renewed its commitment to climate change, as well as enhancing biodiversity alongside increasing the agricultural productivity, lowering green gas emissions from agriculture, with a biodiversity strategy that is yet to be presented to its executive board by the end of this year. So the presentation of the biodiversity strategy is for approval to the board. So with this, IFAD recognizes that climate change and biodiversity losses is one of the main threats to smallholder and their communities. Without biodiversity, the viability of smallholder agriculture is undermined. And this has been really highlighted and shown with the 3 clips that we've seen earlier today. In its new strategic framework, IFAD has recently renewed its commitment to enhancing biodiversity alongside with increased agricultural productivity. So some of the typical forest activities that IFAD finances are community forest, agroforestry, reforestation, as well as community-based management, community-based forest management, with the underlying assumption that local communities have the capacity to be the best manager of the forest and their domain. To put that assumption to the test, IFAD is hosting what we call the Indigenous People Assistance Facility. The short name of that is EPAF. And that is an innovative funding instrument that is directed both operationally and strategically by a board mostly consisting of Indigenous leaders. At the regional level, EPAF is co-managed and coordinated by regional Indigenous people organizations as implementing partners. The objective of the facility is to strengthen Indigenous people's community and their organizations, and then the EPAF finances small projects that foster self-driven development. The EPAF has 3 main components. One, it's to empower the Indigenous people grassroots organization. Second, is to strengthen that network and then to link them with global Indigenous movements. And then the third aspect is to promote knowledge management. A good example of that is the support for Indigenous youth and women to restore the biodiversity of community forests through sustainable planting and management trees, hosting edible caterpillar in the DRC Congo. It is a mouthful, but it's a project that really did marvelous things on the ground. That is a concrete example on how the project strengthened the resilience of forest-dependent community through self-driven development. The community was displaced from their traditional forest in 2006, and then by implementing the EPAF grant, Indigenous youth and women were engaged in the rehabilitation of degraded ecosystem and in sustainable management of community forests through the planting of host 3 of edibles caterpillars in overexploited forests. In addition to that, they were able to establish 7 local forestry monitors communities and committees. So now as we involve communities and forest dependent communities, there are 3 questions. How do we ensure the empowerment of those people living in those forest communities? And I would like to answer that question in 3 parts. First, we have to recognize that the Indigenous people are people with traditions, knowledge, expertise, desires, priorities, and they know what is best for them. Second, we have to seek free and prior of informed consent. That is key. And that is a specific right that pertains to the Indigenous people that is recognized by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and an operational principle empowering those local communities. So that right has to be respected when working with Indigenous peoples. And that important principle is included in IFAD's policies and guides all relationship and all engagements with Indigenous peoples. And the third aspect is also important to recognize that the local communities are the rightful holders or co-owners of the forests. And then we need to strengthen the rights of the local communities to access and manage the forest in order for them to improve their livelihood and protect those resources. It is by recognizing those rights, enable that transfer of knowledge, promoting that intergenerational transmission of knowledge that we can promote and continue to support those communities. And then by supporting those communities, we are also promoting a more sustainable future for the humanity at large. Over to you, Kekashan.
Thank you so much, Nadaya. And yes, you're absolutely right. It is the local and Indigenous communities that have the best knowledge and the best resources themselves to be able to know how best to, work with nature. And, that is why it's so important that they have a seat at the table, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are most affected by the problems that, come from the global north and the Western world and affect them the most, despite them having least responsibility for it. And thank you so much for sharing IFAD's important work in this area to ensure that smallholder farmers and forest dependent communities are not left behind as we move towards a most sustainable world. So thank you once again for sharing your views on IFAD's work with us. And with that, I shall now invite our next panelist, Douglas Reagan, Program Management Officer of UN Habitat. Doug, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kekashan, and really honored to be here and honored to be with such amazing speakers who bring you so many different perspectives on the issue of forest economies and the people. I'm going to bring one which may be a bit different in terms of I work with UN Habitat, which is the UN agency in charge of urban sustainability for the UN system. And so I also want to take a little bit of an angle on urban systems, because oftentimes we don't think about forests being linked to cities. We oftentimes see it as a place where you go outside of cities and such, and I don't think that's the case at all. And my background, I will show a quick presentation after this, but my background shot here is of Kibera, which is the largest informal settlement in Kenya. It at one point in time was a forest, and many of the people that live within it, which total upwards of 1 million people, many of them are agriculturalists, or at least one generation or linked to it. I mean, a lot of the indigenous communities, a lot of communities that live in informal settlements have very strong links to their what in Kenya is called the shamba, where they go up and they have these links and they go back and forth between these informal settlements and back to their agricultural areas, which are oftentimes based on forest products and a forest economy. So they're not that not that far away from where the agriculture, as well as, I mean, forests are super important for many other reasons. And so I just want to give it, I think I got permission to, yeah, I think I'm gonna see, share screen, 2 seconds, sorry, just so I can boot up my presentation here. There we go. Put this on. So can you see?
Yes.
I'm assuming it's great. So I mean, this is just more photos and some quotes from people. I'm not going to give a highly technical presentation. Again, I'm not a forestry expert at all, and nor am I an agriculture expert. I want to just give some context about the issues. The first one I want to show is just this photo. This is of, I am from a Canadian. I'm from British Columbia and actually going to be traveling there sometime today, actually. And as of sometime in early July, Canada had, for 3 days, the hottest place on earth. We're talking almost 50 degrees. And the place that it was 50 degrees was this community, which is an Indigenous community 1 hour north of Vancouver, British Columbia, called Lytton. And it had the hottest temperatures on earth for 3 days. On the third day, basically the town burnt down within an hour. It basically was an explosion. This is in a forested area. It's an Indigenous community, very linked to traditional ways of living. There's a salmon stream there, so that's a fish from the Pacific Northwest. They do some logging, sometimes sustainably. They do hunting and so on. And so this is a community that was very much based on this. And what happened, and is what is currently happening globally, but I'm just going to focus on my hometown actually, is that we have had the hottest temperatures ever recorded north of the 49th parallel, which is the parallel that runs along the US-Canada border. We also obviously have the hottest temperatures ever recorded. And in terms of talking about forest economies and agriculture, the challenge we're faced with right now is that the forest is for again, in Western Canada and the Western US, we're talking about forests that are just going up. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of acres torched in the next while, and not just burnt to in a sustainable way. And you can have forests managed that way. And indigenous communities actually do manage forests, where they go in and they do brush burning and they clear out underbrush and stuff during the wet season. And that doesn't allow there to be a lot of accumulation of forest dry wood during the dry seasons in the summer. Indigenous communities have done that forever, but unfortunately, the non-indigenous communities through colonization have basically stripped that away and made it. And so the forestry practices that are now practiced specifically in Canada, but in many places in the world, do not support proper ways of preventing fires. And with these fires that we're looking at, what I'm hearing now is that this has dramatically changed the ecosystem. Like, we're not just talking a regular, it was a forest fire, which we've had a few over the last few years, but the ecosystems are gone. The watersheds that feed the water, the salmon streams. They have a horrific photo of salmon are a main fish that are fished off the West Coast. They have photos that in The Guardian actually about a week ago, basically showing salmon that have almost been boiled to death. They say on the shorelines of British Columbia that during this one specific time that over 1.5 billion sea animals died. That would be mussels, crabs, everything like that. Basically the foreshore of the ocean is stripped bare. So not only is the forest gone, but also the ocean and such. And I obviously want to be positive, but I also want to say that I think we've reached the tipping point that Greta Thunberg and many people have talked about, and we've gone over. This is a whole new world that we're moving on. But people still are fighting. So we did a conference on International Youth Day on food systems. One of the keynote speakers we had was Leah Namugerwa. She is a wonderful woman who runs Fridays for Future in Uganda. She does she has since she's one of Greta Thunberg's followers, but she has run a program since for the last 2 years called Birthday Trees, where basically she plants trees for people's birthdays and encourages people to do this. I mean, for her, there's two sides. I mean, Leah is a fierce advocate, activist. She's online, she's everywhere pushing back against what these young people feel is basically the adults of the world abandoning them. And if you've seen the articles in the New York Times, I think, Greta Thunberg's most recent article, that's the headline is, "The adults of the world have abandoned us. Our parents have abandoned us." That we are now in a situation where we don't know if we have a future. And also Lee has been, as I said, an activist. There's a huge forested area in Uganda called Bugoma. The Bugoma forest itself is being leveled by sugar plantations. And as well, there's a proposed oil pipeline that's supposed to go through East Africa. Again, we can talk about agriculture and how the sustainability of it, and critical that we give Indigenous people, but as well as other people who live sustainably with forests. But we also have to realize that our current industrial economy does not support forests. We create monocultures. We wipe out mangrove forests. And then in some of the monocultures here, again in East Africa, are sugar. And then if you go into Asia, you used to look at rubber, and then many other different monocultures that basically destroy biodiversity. I mean, we basically undermine our ability to survive as a planet. I wouldn't even say as humans, but as a planet. One of the other things that was mentioned that I thought was really great, and it also has, again, a lot of angles towards cities, is the concept of circular economies. This is a project we did, or we're currently doing with young people on the coast of Kenya and pretty much East Africa, where we're working with them around recycling of plastics. What I think is, and that is definitely in that kind of circular economy where we no longer can just create stuff that its end use is, and it's just then thrown away and landfilled. We have to look at how circular economies work. especially, and I do a lot of work in the informal settlements and slums. There's over 1 billion people, most of them young people, 70% plus young people, who make up these slum populations, and they're desolately poor. The issue of food and food production and such during this time in the developing world has more been an issue of loss of livelihoods and inability to purchase food at all, and purchase anything, any kind of healthy food. So it's not production as much anymore. It's just the ability, the people have lost their jobs. So I guess that is production, but I mean, we really have to look at just the hundreds of millions of people that are on edge and not able to feed themselves due to what's happened with the pandemic, but then as well this larger crisis that's going on currently. We also had an amazing speaker in Dr. Diyu, who is a nutritionist out of Senegal, working with a program group called funded by Fondation Botner. And basically, again, his thing was also looking that we need to promote diversity, have nutritious food and healthy food, and that we're working, and what he said very strongly is we're working with the planet, in step with the planet, not out of step with the planet, was his quote. And that's again where we have to look, whether we're in the forest economy, whether we're in any food system economy, we need to definitely do that. Lastly, we also had a great presentation on water systems and technology. I think we do need to look at technology. Yes, I mean, I've worked a lot with Indigenous people in Canada and globally. And on one hand, there seems to sometimes be a bit of a glorification of the Indigenous ways that we used to do 200-300 years ago. The Indigenous peoples are also very aware of technology. They're very aware that this is a new world. They are holding on to values that I think we need to hold, but they're not necessarily saying that we have to go back 300 years, which is something that I think is an unfair slant against how Indigenous communities are working. And technology is a key piece to that. We have to look at how we can best provide water for crops. We have to look at how we can best, again, as I mentioned, deal with forest fires and this increased climate. If we don't, we can look back to some of the Indigenous practices, which we shouldn't leave behind. But on the other hand, as well, we have to also look to how technology can help. I think Mrs. Espinosa mentioned the need to have people accessing technology. It's true. We cannot assume that the world just continues on and leaves behind so many people. If we're looking at the pandemic again, the UNICEF did a report that found that over 350 million young people have not accessed school at all. Yet we're seemingly believing that technology is allowing everyone to get online. This is just not the case. It's not the case in the informal settlements I work with and in the rural areas and Indigenous communities and such. We really have to make sure technology is accessible to everyone and that we use it in the best way possible. And that's my presentation. And yeah, thank you so much again. I think it's been an excellent discussion, and I'm really looking forward to discussing more. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you for highlighting the link between like urban environments and forests. I don't think many people knew that Kibera used to be a forest, and it's often we don't realize how important urban sustainability is as well to forest development and vice versa. So thank you so much for sharing that with us and bringing in that different perspective. Thank you once again. And with that, I shall invite our next speaker, Mr. Marcos Montoro, who's the NGO and Civil Society Liaison Officer of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification and Drought Secretariat. Marcos, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for inviting us to the UN Secretariat to Combat Desertification to participate in this panel, and particularly the link that we can have with the food systems, which is coming very soon. For us, it's really important also to participate and also engage with the young people, and we have been doing. And I'm going to bring another perspective, as our distinguished delegate participants have already done it. In my side, it will be some touching also on the opportunities. We have been seeing what are the problems that we are facing, what are the difficulties that we have, but also what are the opportunities, particularly for young people in the area of the food systems, and also the protection of the land, and that what this can bring to all of us. As you know, the UNCCD Secretariat has been designated as the UN anchor agency for the action track number 3 of the Food System Summit, which is the boosting nature positive production. So we are working together with WWF, but also other UN organizations and international partners to bring this track into the discussion. So the main objective and what we are trying to find out is what could be the solutions to transform our food systems in a way that are beneficial for nature, for climate, but above all, and as we have been saying, for the people. So this could be done in many ways. There are plenty, and some of them have been already identified by some of the panelists here, but we could think on rethinking, for example, the subsidies for food and agriculture. So promoting agroecology or any other regenerative agriculture, and working in a way that we can ensure the health and resilience of our soils. If we look at the science, they tell us that the food systems are responsible for 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions and over 80% of the deforestation and ecosystems are lost, and the degradation of almost half of agricultural land. At the convention, we know that if we invest in sustainable land and in healthy soils, we could help producing nutritious food for all. So that's why crop and livestock diversity could help also in provide these balanced diets and that keep us healthy and help our children to grow strong. Land and ecosystem restoration can also create immediate and decent jobs, many of which are in agriculture. We have, in many cases, and particularly our modern society, they are stigmatizing the jobs that they come from the land, and particularly in agriculture, and that's something that is really difficult for us. And what we try to do is also see and give some beauty to that, because at the end of the day, all our food, or most of our food, our fiber, with what we are doing, our clothes and the feed for the animals, it's coming from the land, and this is something that we're trying to support. So there are jobs that we need to build forward better to slow climate change and protect biodiversity and free millions of people from poverty and hunger. And at the end, this will definitely help us in creating a world of peace and prosperity and equality. In this regard, what we have been doing at the Secretariat in the last few months, and I have been involved, and I see that Kekashan also is going to be supporting in the future on this, is organizing some series of webinars where we are focusing on land-based jobs for youth, aiming at showcasing opportunities that land can offer to young people to improve their living conditions and making a profit while ensuring a healthy land. So in this series that we have done, we saw like businessmen and young businesswomen showing examples on their initiatives as agripreneurs, for instance, on how technology is helping others to use the land in a sustainable way. But also we have seen what are the challenges that young people are facing when trying to put these projects there. Of course, everything comes into our mind is, at the first moment is the financing, but also there are others like capacity building, mentorship, etc. So I would like to use this platform and also sharing with these panelists the opportunity to invite you for the next webinar that we will be doing in the 2nd of September, which will be particularly focusing on Asia And we will be looking at how business can live or die from external environment. What are the things that are making an idea to be successful or not? And in this case, we will have different people participating, including some social entrepreneurs that they will show what they are doing, to have some responsible farmers and working on regenerative agriculture, or also some a company of that is using gaming to encourage tree planting and to facilitate planting trees, or something really cool that we have found out is someone that has a real estate that integrates farming and landscaping. So there are alternatives there that they can help also bringing the land into the picture. Following also something that my sister from IFAD has been mentioning on the aspect of how the indigenous peoples and how we can ensure that people can access and use the land is very important. These voluntary guidelines on responsible governance for tenure of land, fisheries and forests in the context of food, national food security. You know, the UNCCD Secretariat or the convention, we are very blessed since the parties to our convention, the 197 parties to the convention, they took a decision saying that, yes, if you want to tackle the issue of land degradation, deforestation, you need to address land tenure. So they are asking us to look at these voluntary guidelines and see how we can provide tools for the countries to integrate them into the implementation of the convention. So that's why we are working with FAO and International Land Coalition, Landesa, Land Portal, and other partners to try to bring these tools that eventually will be helpful for those that they are using the land, those that they are using the forest. So I think I will stop here, and ladies, we can give more time also for the participants. Thank you very much again for inviting us, Kikashan.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Marcos. Thank you for sharing UNCCD's work. And, you know, we really, as you said, we really do need to build forward better. And in that way, we can mitigate climate change, stop biodiversity loss, and in turn, lift millions out of poverty and ensure that our indigenous and local communities aren't left behind. And that also ensures that we can create a peaceful and prosperous and sustainable world. And also thank you for highlighting the importance of land degradation neutrality as well as land tenure security. So thank you once again. And with that, I shall invite our next panelist, Ms. Anshita Hegde, Chapter Head of Green Hope Foundation, India. Anshita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kaksha. Greetings from India. I am delighted to be part of this discussion on a very relevant topic. The current pandemic has forced us to see the inconsistencies of our infrastructure. What many countries believe to have worked perfectly 2 years ago have no future now. It is simply inefficient. The current economy has undoubtedly succeeded in creating unprecedented economic output, wealth, and human welfare. But rather than benefiting all sections of the society, it has led to unequal accumulation of wealth and skewed development in selected sectors that has resulted in the exacerbation of social and gender inequalities. And that's not all. The unchecked development has caused the loss of nature to an extent that it threatens the stability of our economies and societies. To quantitatively highlight this disparity, over 70% of people are affected by rising inequalities. A third of the world's land is severely degraded. We are losing forests at an alarming rate, and up to 1 million species are threatened with extinction. And COVID-19 has been adding to the numbers. Many more regions are likely to face acute food shortages, rising poverty levels, and alarming rates of nature loss. Everything indicates that our current system is not enough and is very far from efficient. It is clear that the world's governments lack something fundamental, yet many countries avoid facing or even questioning these infrastructural defects. Instead of learning from the pandemic, Very few nations have initiated the process to rebuild better. As a young person, I see the problem. Its reasons are obvious to me, but do not quite understand why isn't it being addressed? Why isn't the world government today trying to build a better and well-equipped tomorrow? It's a matter of individual greed and political motives, and hence the responsibility is largely upon us, the youth, to work for a better future. And this is what our mission is at Green Hope Foundation, where for the last decade, we have been working with vulnerable communities, amongst them with girls and women, empowering them using education for sustainable development to provide them with the skills, attitudes, and behaviors that lead to their self-reliance. In Bangladesh and in India, our local teams are working amongst forest-dependent rural communities, building toilets, teaching them about sanitation and hygiene, installing rainwater harvesting solutions that provide them with a constant source of clean water. Our skill-based training programs on sustainable agriculture and poultry farming are providing them with alternative livelihoods. We are creating local circular bioeconomies that are elevating them out of poverty while helping to restore their natural environment and biodiversity. Millions of children have dropped out of school due to COVID from these communities globally. Digital learning is now the only way forward, but these regions don't even have electricity. To bridge this digital divide, we have installed solar panels in schools, connected routers and Wi-Fi hotspots, installed computers linked to projectors and screens, through which these children have resumed their education. This month, we launched our mobile library project that runs on clean energy. We are taking the library to the homes of these children who are out of school, and we intend to impact 250,000 children in the coming year. Our impact demonstrates that it is indeed possible to rebuild better. The pandemic has allowed us to identify key areas of development and regroup our resources. With the world gradually opening up now, we have the opportunity of learning from our past mistakes. As demonstrated through our projects, nature-based net zero solutions must be the way forward. Localizing the SDGs, facilitated by the creation of circular bioeconomies that balance usage and regeneration of natural resources, efficiently transforming and managing our land, food, health, and industrial systems while achieving sustainable well-being. It will require engagement of all stakeholders. People in positions of authority must also be more accountable. In most developing nations, there are legislation gaps. Corruption is rampant, and this is especially evident in how forests and other natural resources continue to be exploited. These gaps must be highlighted, and we need to have critical debates about the meaning of sustainability in the bioeconomy context and come up with ideas and solutions to bring the forest-dependent communities to the mainstream to improve their lifestyle using this concept. Suitable training given to forest communities by NGOs such as ours and government agencies have proven to be very effective, ensuring a good revenue generation model and helping to create a truly innovative, sustainable, and inclusive economy that works for all. But most importantly, we need to educate the bioeconomy leaders of today and tomorrow, the youth of today. And concluding, given the current rate of degradation and the rate at which climate change is threatening our future survival, we must act quickly and decisively. There's no room for failure now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anshita. And yes, absolutely, we do need to act quickly and right now because we don't have much time left to create a more sustainable world. Thank you for sharing Green Hope Foundation's work and also proving how important it is that every single sector does their bit to ensure that we can rebuild forward better. So thank you once again. And with that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing your views with us today. This has been such an amazing discussion that has brought together so many different perspectives, and I think that is so amazing. So we shall now take questions from the audience. So once again, just to inform our audience that you can either raise your hand or write it in the Q&A box or in our chat on Facebook Live. And I do see that there are people who have raised their hands. And before we take that, I see Pragna has raised her hand. So Pragna, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone, and I would just like to thank all the panelists for such an amazing discussion. It was really enlightening. My question is to all the panelists. How can we better address the gender, forest, food, nature intersectionalities for equitable development? And what are the gaps and how can these be mitigated?
Amazing. Thank you, Pragna. Nadaya, I know that we are colleagues at the Generation Equality Forum, Feminist Action for Climate Justice, AC. So would you like to take that question first?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for that question. It's a loaded question, so I'm going to leave some also for the other panelists to contribute. But then there are a couple of things that you mentioned. One is, of course, the gender inequality. And so the gender inequality, we know that is prevailing in all the different systems. So addressing them, understanding the causes, the underlying causes of gender inequality is very important. So it's important first to understand and then to conduct a situation analysis. Then when we look at addressing the gender inequality, there are different levels of activities that we can consider. One is related to economic empowerment. The second is voice and representation. And the third one is equal participation, equal workload, and equal share of benefits. So those three dimensions are very important. Equally important is to address the underlying causes of inequality and also recognize, as you mentioned, that through the intersectionality, there are different needs and priorities. And so it is only when there is a clear understanding, for instance, that a woman that is single, that is suffering from a disability, would have different priorities that a woman that is already at the top of her game, that does not have any other consideration, or the priorities of a young man would also be different. So equally important is to engage young men is the conversation, as well as traditional leaders, because those are the holders of the traditional norms. And then until those are addressed in the discussion, it would be very difficult to put to the table the different perspective and then reach a common agreement on how jointly to address those underlying causes. That would be my contribution thus far. Over to you, Kekashan.
Thank you so much. Nadaya, would any of our other panelists like to answer that question? If not, yes, Ms. Maria.
Well, I have to say that Nadaya's response was so comprehensive that it's hard to add something, but just to say that the intersection between a sustainable development model and gender equality is so much connected. And not only gender equality and women in positions of power, at the decision-making table at all levels, even at the community level, at the national policy-making level, but also at the international level, but also the need to address seriously all forms of inequality, all inequalities and exclusion, including racism, including affirmative action for persons with disabilities, and something that is critical. We have discussed so many times, Kekashan, the need for a truly intergenerational approach, where intergenerational dialogue and where the voice and agencies, an agency of young change makers is at the forefront. And not just to be politically correct and tick the boxes and tokenistic kind of narratives and discourses, but really co-creating, really, co-responsibility and concerted action. When I hear, the wisdom around this very table, the speakers today, the knowledge is there, the science is there. We know a little bit, the what's. We even know the hows, the how, no? But sometimes I think that the weak part is the who, the leadership needed, the political will. And when we say leadership and political will, we automatically think that it is about heads of state and government, that it is about the Secretary General of the UN to take, the right informed science-based decisions. And no, it is a whole of society responsibility. And, these are time of hardship, of loss, of multiple crises, but we are also living a time of innovation, of creativity, of the opportunity of building forward better. And I think we need to take the opportunity. And for that, just to keep in mind the intersectional nature of inequalities is extremely important. The arithmetics of inequalities is just hard to explain because we know how to address and deal with these issues. And yet it's the other day, sorry that I didn't want to respond, but now, okay, just a last comment. I was taking part of a webinar organized by the Nizami Ganjavi Center. And someone said, it's like when we go to the doctor, we are told, you need to lose weight, you need to exercise, otherwise, you can die. And still, we don't do it. What is going on with humans? What is going on with us? And it's still, we don't do it. And we know, how to have a healthy diet, how to exercise. We know, and yet we do not act. So it is time for action, I think this, and sorry about the long answer. So back to you, Kikashan.
No worries at all. Thank you, Ms. Maria. And, we shall take questions from our remaining audience members as well. So we'll just take it together. So first, Aliyu, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our wonderful panelists for providing such an insightful and very educative webinar. So my question has to do with the involvement of youth into the fight for climate justice. So we have a lot of international conferences where national leaders promise a better day for youth. How can youth themselves see this as their responsibility to provide a better world for themselves and future generations? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aliyu. Your audio was a bit off, but I think the question is that there are a lot of international conferences, but how can young people truly know and take action for ensuring climate justice? Am I right?
Definitely. How can young people themselves see it as their responsibility in fighting for climate justice? Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Aliyu. And the next question, Duty, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Dyuti Vaspal, and I'm a member of Green Hope Foundation's Children's Board. I would like to thank all the panelists today for such an amazing discussion. My question is, how do we bridge the digital divide that has pushed back further the development opportunities for youth from forest-based communities?
Amazing. Thank you, Dyuti. And I see that we have a question in the chat, in the Q&A box, which is how can we ensure greater participation of forest-based stakeholders in decision-making processes? Because currently, most policies and decisions are taken by those who have never stepped foot in a forest. So thank you for the question, Hitasha. And with that, I hand it over to our panelists.
Let me start with the question on the digital divide. I mean, that's a reality. So That's a reality, not just in the climate context, that's a reality in the global context, that 50% of the population is not even connected, and the other 50% that's kind of connected. 2/3 of them are not really connected because they don't have the bandwidth and the technical resources to access the bandwidth, even if it were to be available. So if you look at the whole mass of mobile phones, the predominant majority of them are analog mobile phones. They're not really smartphones. So that challenge remains. But I think, speaking in the context of the climate challenge, I think what is important is to build digital bridges. And I want to share an example. The organization where I work now, the Global Alliance, we are developing with a lot of very significant global partners something called SCALE. SCALE stands for Soil Carbon Alliance for a Low Emissions Economy. And SCALE basically signifies the scale at which we want to approach the problem. Now, all of you, through your own lived experiences, would have seen, while working with NGOs, especially in the rural communities, how little understanding or possibilities they have to be able to benefit from the digital ecosystem. So you might have a farmer that's doing exceptionally well in natural farming, nature-based solutions, improving soil carbon every year with every crop cycle. But if they really want to go to the market and quantify the carbon they have in their soil, they would need a baseline study, and they would need to quantify it over a period. And then they need to find somebody that can certify it. And then they need to go to the market and find somebody who's willing to buy it. And God bless you, if you only have 1 hectare of land, that's not even worth anybody's time, because the big consultants that charge thousands of dollars by the hour have no interest in you, small farmer. So what we're trying to do is, can we build a digital bridge without bothering the farmer? Now, can you build a bridge that actually harnesses all the data while keeping data sovereignty with the farmer? And then, once you aggregate all that carbon by certifying at a jurisdictional scale, then suddenly you have 100,000 hectares of cropland that is being certified, and anybody that is within that landscape automatically qualifies. And then when, let's say, Microsoft buys that soil carbon, then the money that comes in automatically drops into the digital wallets of the farmers without they having to bother about anything. That's the kind of networks and platforms we need to come together and build for this to work for the farmer, because then that will be the incentive that will drive the rollout of nature-based solutions across a complete landscape. Otherwise, we'll keep talking about it, as someone so rightly pointed out. We have been having these conferences all the time, and we've been doing it since 1992, since the Rio conference and the Rio conventions that came out of that conference. We just kill ourselves with these conferences every year. And thanks to COVID, we missed a few, but we didn't miss any action because there wasn't any. So that's the reality that you have to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Travati. I saw that Marcos, you raised your hand.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Dikashan, and thank you all the colleagues and the participants for these questions. They are really, really interesting. I have been also typing on the chat with some ideas and suggestions, and trying to complement what we are saying, just for the sake of time. I want to focus on what Aliu has been asking on what could be the engagement of the youth, particularly when we are talking about the negotiations, and see how they can be involved. Of course, there are some mechanisms when we talk about climate change. So you have a platform, which is the Yungo, where there is representatives from young people. Of course, there is always a limitation on how you can participate, but honestly, I have been discussing with them in many issues, and the level of engagement that they have with all those that they are members is really high. Before they take a position or they present something, they try to bring as many young people as possible. It's good that you are working in an institution like Green Hope, and which is also very well linked at the international level. I'm talking about the UNCCD, our convention, where is a very important actor, but also with other multilateral environmental agreements. So I think through the association is a way that you can make your voice heard. But one thing is what is happening at the international level, but also what you can do at the local and national level. There is where you can make a real difference. Of course, the other things is complicated, but you have to be also, or your voice needs to be there. I was reading an article very recently in the Spanish newspapers, and after the IPCC and the reports that is coming there, and they say we are right now at a war, and it's not a war with what we have around. It's a war that we are already fighting with the future generations, because what we are doing with the planet and the planet we are going to leave for our children or the children of our children is that we are competing already with the resources that they will be having. So that is why it's very important to change our way of living, change our patterns, go for a sustainable production and consumption that can help in mitigating and reducing those the effects of that war that we are already at with the future generations. Thank you. I will stop here.
Amazing. Thank you. Marcos, Anshita, your hand is raised.
Yeah. So I'll start by addressing the first question. As we have seen at Green Hope Foundation, education for sustainable development helps to build that empathy and allows young people to feel responsible towards their community and the planet. And for the second question, I agree with my fellow panelists that we need digital bridges, which is something that we at Green Hope Foundation are also doing. And to address the final question, the one thing that we have been doing at Green Hope has been to normalize data collection by grassroots actors so that their lived experiences are truly understood at the highest levels of policy making.
Amazing. Thank you, Anshita. And really, thank you so much to our audience for your excellent questions today. And thank you, panelists, for your responses. And with that, I shall ask our panelists to give your concluding remarks in 30 seconds or less, and we shall go in reverse order. So Anshita, the floor is yours.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me part of this discussion and concluding that we need to act now and we need to act effectively. The time to sit and think has gone by.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anshita. Marcos?
I cannot say anything more than what Anshita has been saying. So I agree with that. And thank you again for inviting us.
Great. Thank you. Doug?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm going to answer the last question, but I'll answer it here. Is just one of the best ways for young people to get involved is to create their own organizations. Youth-led organizing is an amazing way of influence.
Doug, we seem to have lost you. Maybe we can come back to you, but yeah, we do seem to have lost Doug, which is unfortunate. Sometimes technology does act up. So, but thank you, Doug, for sharing your first viewpoint with us. And with that, Nadaya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Not much to add, except to say that whether we are talking about the youth or the indigenous community, indigenous peoples, not about them, without them. Over.
Amazing. Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Mr. Travati.
I think the two things very quickly. One is that all the great ideas need a lot of money to get implemented. In the absence of resources, they'll remain great ideas in our minds and on paper. So we need to really dedicate our collective efforts towards getting the resources to be deployed on these great ideas. Many of them have been mentioned in the chat box. And on the indigenous people, I couldn't agree more. I am currently the chancellor of an institution that actually has 40,000 students on its rolls, entirely free. We teach them, we bring them up, and as we say, that they are the guardians of the forest, and to the extent they are able to sit with us on the table and challenge us every day, then the know-all attitude of people that have never set foot on the forest, as somebody rightly mentioned, that will change. So that's actually an extremely important point that Nadaya made. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Ms. Maria.
Well, very quickly, this was really an incredible trip today, and I have to say perhaps two takeaways. The number one is that I think that we should take the opportunity we are provided today to truly build forward better. But we have to agree on the fundamentals, on the basics. We need an agreed checklist of what we mean by building forward better, a greener and more inclusive society, and a renewed sustainable development model. And I think for that, we really do need to shape a new deal, a new Green Deal, a new social contract between humans. And for the shaping and building of this new social contract, I would end by using the phrase from Nadaya again, and nothing about them without them. And that has basically, our challenge is not only to act, not only to come together for this new social contract, but to make sure that the voices, the agency, the transformative power of Indigenous and local communities come to the decision-making table. We really do need to level the playing field in terms of power sharing. And back to you, Kakashi.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ms. Maria. And thank you to all of our panelists for your wonderful and thought-provoking insights today. And there is really so much that each and every one of us can do to address and mitigate this crisis, and build forward better in protecting our forests and its rich biodiversity and the people who live amongst these communities. It's not only an issue for just rural communities to deal with, it's also critical for urban denizens to be aware of and be involved in this. And of course, as our panelists have stated, that we have to ensure that our local and Indigenous actors, we don't just speak at them and don't just come at them with a top-down approach, but they are the ones who are actually involved and lead these processes, because at the end of the day, these challenges affect them the most. So we need behavioral change. We need to facilitate the just transition to a circular bioeconomy, and just ensure that together we are really able to build a more sustainable world. So thank you once again to our wonderful panelists, to our engaged audience. We depend on you to take the messages of our webinars to your own zones of influence and ensure that action is taken. So till we meet again soon for our next webinar, please take good care of yourselves. Please stay safe, because the pandemic is still not over, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.